guys against the bad guys. I understand that. They're supposedly the good guys against the bad guys.
The whole thing.
Yeah, but the thing is, you see, this is the problem. You're saying about political naivety, but even the reaction from this room shows you that people don't have the trust in the Democrats. I mean, it would be. I mean, in one sense, it would be great if the Occupy movement looked to Obama, you know, for support and help, and there was an alliance. But that's not going to happen because it's not part of the Occupiers movement's philosophy, is it? And there is no trust in the political establishment to do that, which it's a sad reflection of of the way things are. But how do you? I mean, the Occupy movement has a great purity to it. How can that purity grow into a mass movement that can really shift the political landscape? That's what I'm interested in. I don't know how it can happen. I'd love to see that happen.
I think that part of it is that the Occupy movement grew out of disappointment with the Obama administration. That there were a lot of people who felt that there was going to be regulation or enforcement of existing laws, and there weren't, and so that's why there was a lack of trust. And I think it's important what Tyler was saying about, there's a false dynamic, there's a false vilification of Tea Party versus Occupy, in my opinion. Very early, I was in Chicago, there was a Tea Party happening, and I was like, oh, I want to check something out, and just see what it's about. And I walked over there, and it looked very much like when I went to an Occupy protest in the very beginning. And then, a special interest group with a lot of money starts funneling money into it and taking it over and breaking in signs and making it a block within the Republican Party. And there were a lot of people who tried to make Occupy a block within the Democratic Party. And I think what was really important to me, seeing the work coming into the Occupy Comics project, is that it's not really getting too much into a Democrat versus Republican dynamic, because it is trying to transcend all of that. There are moneyed interest controlling both parties, in the opinion of a lot of people. So I think it's complicated. And I'm sorry, you have a question over there.
Well, I think the importance of the Occupy movement was that it gave a physical presence to a lot of the dialogue that was already going on, like on the internet, and so you had to sort of find it before. And the great thing about the Occupy movement was that we finally had a place where people could go and congregate, because we never had that before. And I think bringing that into the media and making it mainstream dialogue, where we can have a seminar at Comic-Con about this, it just shows how important that movement is and was. And I think the other thing is, I'm on the executive board of the California Democratic Party. I run a nonprofit, and I can tell you that both political parties rely on a lot of money coming in order just to function, and a lot of nonprofits do too. And the Occupy movement was one of the places that was not controlled by wealthy people. And I think that was what was really important. It wasn't just participatory democracy, but it was also just people giving $5 or $10 to sort of keep these camps going. And so, obviously it was inspired by Arab Spring, which I think was important, but it's really important for people to understand that if there's not a movement that isn't controlled by people who are very wealthy, they're not going to look out for your interests. I run a nonprofit for people who are homeless. There are other nonprofits who take money from banks, and they're getting on board with privatizing public housing. So, it all sort of works together. So, we really need to, I think, embrace the movement. And I think the Democratic Party is really split. We had our convention here in San Diego at this convention center in February, and there was an Occupy protest, and they locked the doors because they were afraid that the protesters were going to come in. And we should actually be embracing it. And I'm with the Progressive Caucus, and we obviously embrace the Occupy movement. Most of us are protesters. Our chair got arrested at an Occupy protest. And so everybody's very split. And I think the more corporate Democrats are fear-based and concerned about that money not coming into the party, and the rest of us who are very principled, highly principled, and understand that we don't win unless we sort of expose a lot of what's going on in the corporate world, that we're going to lose, because we're just sort of embracing all the things that Republicans are then.
There's a great resource. You're talking about moneyed interests. And there's a great resource. There's a This American Life episode, if anyone listens to that. They have a podcast and a broadcast on NPR. But they did an episode about fundraising. And they could only get Democrats to talk to them because the Republicans didn't want to acknowledge that this happens. But they talked about how they spend between 40 and 75% of their time while in office fundraising. And when we have real issues, they're out there trying to raise money so that they can run their next election. And I think if you were to call that what it is, you would have to call it corruption. And I think that we can, that's something to at least be aware of. So I would listen to the show. It's really, really informative.
I'd be curious to hear people talk about how do you get Occupy and say the comics to speak to people who are very resistant. I don't think it's so much that facts aren't out there. I think it's that people either ignore them or like, just choose to focus on what they consider, true.
Well, I mean, we all live in our own little personal echo chambers now, so we see what we want to see, and the whole world is like working to just show us what it thinks that we want to see. So people aren't going to stumble upon something. They're less likely to. But what I think is so great about this project is that, people keep saying like, well, this is what the Occupy movement is, and this is what it's not. It's not F the police. It's not anti-capitalist. You guys should come to Oakland. Because that's part of it. It is sometimes F the police. It is sometimes anti-capitalist, and there are a whole lot of people who hate that stuff. And that's all part of the narrative. These are all these different threads. They should all be a part of the history, and that's why I think that this project that's why it appealed to me, and I think that that's why it has potential for some broad-based interest.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I know you had your hand up for a while.
First of all, thank you all for being here. It's really great to see that this continues on, that the discussion continues. Back last November, I cut a film called While We Watch and got the chance to show that to a lot of people and really gauge their opinions on Occupy Wall Street in a very different way by letting them see so much stuff firsthand that they really hadn't gotten a chance to through mainstream media. For the most part, everybody's opinion has been that it is, they like the idea of knowledge propagating, of ideas being spread, and the conversation that takes place. But the number one comment that we usually get with the film is, what now? What is the objective? If each of you could articulate an objective or a course of action that you'd like to see take place, what would that one objective be?
All right, this is going to be the end, so maybe we'll just start at the back and quickly because we are encroaching on the next panel.
Sure. Yeah, in brief, I think that sort of exploding the fundamentalism of this economic idea has been perpetuated for the last 40 years or so, that neoliberal economics are necessary for a healthy economy. And I think that once we open up that question of what is it, how could we democratize economy in that way? I don't see how people can argue with that because they can mean anything they want as long as that discussion is suddenly open. Like, oh no, it doesn't have to be like this. And after the collapse of so many countries' economies in Latin America in the 2000s, they were following these same economic policies that we were. It suddenly became more of an open question, more experimentation in what healthy and democratized economy could be. I think the question is important.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, just and have that conversation elsewhere outside of this type of arena. I feel like even the people who come to Comic-Con and even the people in these bigger cities, I think we all understand, we sort of have an idea of what the movement's about, but I actually don't think that people throughout the United States do, and I don't want to blame media, I think just to get knowledge out is really important.